we understand we're going to have chaos and we're going to embrace it, and we'll just get these little groups of paratroopers together, and we're going to go out, and whoever's the leader is going to direct them, and we're okay with that, and we'll tackle whatever comes our way.
Thank you for your service. I understand you got 24 years.
Yeah, and I saw you've interviewed a few of us. I decided not to listen to one of your interviews of a ex-military person. Instead, I listened to the one with the woman that's doing the books, that's using AI to build basically memoirs of business leaders.
Yeah, great conversation that was. But definitely, again, thank you for your service. It's an honor to sit together and to share this time. And one of the things I love that you had mentioned was you actually take people to battlefields to kind of really make it relatable to them. Like, hey, if we're going to learn about leadership, let's jump right in and really kind of show you the tactical, practical ways to do it. Give me a little bit of backstory on just kind of your history, who you are, and kind of how you got into that part, if you would.
Yeah. So I assume we're recording right now and all that, and we're live now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I grew up in Ohio. My family did not have a military background, but as a kid, I loved to read. And I would go to the Delaware County District Library, and my mom had to get special dispensation so I could check out more books than you were allowed to as a kid. But it tended between fiction and World War II history. And of course, all the great World War II generals, like the Eisenhowers, the Pattons, the MacArthurs, all had attended West Point. And so when it came time to apply to college, West Point was just a natural fit. I got in and decided to go. After I graduated, I studied history at West Point. I have a degree in military history from West Point. So continued that passion, and then went out into the Army for my first job. And I went to the 82nd Airborne Division as a young second lieutenant, as an infantry officer. And we almost did the invasion of Haiti in 1994. I know that's ancient history for most of your listeners, but it was quite exciting as a young second lieutenant to get live ammunition and rig up on your parachutes and think about jumping into the Port-au-Prince International Airport to help further the United States interests. We didn't do it. We turned around and we came back, and then I decided to stick around in the military. And I kept saying I was going to stop doing it when it stopped being fun, and it stopped being fun 24 years down the road. Along the way, I went to Kosovo, Bosnia, Korea, 3 trips to Iraq, and a trip to Afghanistan over that 24-year career. So despite not getting to go to Haiti, I think I made up for it along the way with the other deployments. That's sort of a short history of my military experience, but I'll throw it back to you and see. I'm sure I used an acronym or something like that needs explained.
Yeah, no, I think that you've covered that pretty well. You know, I think I don't know if it's the most interesting part, but one of the parts about that interests me the most is the idea of being a paratrooper and jumping into a situation that, you know, you've obviously prepared for, but, you know, I would tend to imagine there's got to be a lot of thoughts that go through your head when you are, you know, jumping out of a perfectly lit airplane, going into kind of the heat of the moment. How do you mentally prepare for that? Because I think if you contrast that with what the average person will do in the course of a day when they wake up and tackle their to-do list, obviously it's nowhere near as intense or life-threatening. But, you know, I think that there are a lot of people who struggle with jumping into their day and being able to tackle the 5 things that they don't want to face. Right? I would imagine there's probably some parallels there that you could draw.
Yeah. The first parallel that I think, at least that resonated with me, in the first person that sort of asked that question, but I love being a paratrooper. I know this sounds to some of the audience will sound uh, not the most intelligent piece, but I enjoyed the excitement and the adrenaline of parachuting. I didn't particularly, there's a bit of fear. Even I ended up doing 102 jumps over my career, and even on the 102nd one, you're still nervous and you're trying to channel that fear and that energy into whatever's going to happen. I think the other more interesting thing, and is more applicable for your listeners, is you take the military, which is a very organized, bureaucratic kind of organization, lots of processes, and then you take this group of paratroopers and you throw them out of a plane, and you expect chaos on the ground, and you jump out in the middle of the night. You might land where you think you're supposed to land. You might land where you don't think you're supposed to land, and then the great thing about the airborne or the paratrooper mentality was you just kind of said, okay, I'm going to find 3 or 4 uh, men or women around me, and we're going to go get after it, and we're going to we will cause as much havoc as we can if we're not where we're supposed to be, or we're going to go to where we're supposed to be, and fulfill the mission. And that ethos has been there since World War II, when you had paratroopers jumping over Normandy or Sicily, or Holland, and it continues to this day. This idea that, hey, we understand we're going to have chaos and we're going to embrace it, and we'll just get these little groups of paratroopers together, and we're going to go out, and whoever's the leader is going to direct them, and we're okay with that, and we'll tackle whatever comes our way.
Yeah. How do you mentally prepare for the unknown, right? Jumping into chaos. Because obviously, I'm sure you prepare for certain situations so you're ready tactically, but you can't prepare for all of them. And there's always some unknown factor. Like, what's the training like for jumping into whatever comes your way? I know I'm going to tackle it.
Well, the flippant response is, sometimes we were our own worst enemies, and we caused our own chaos on a daily basis to our organizations, by last minute requirements and things like that. And so that would be the flippant piece. The other piece is Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower had this quote that said, I found that plans basically, and I'm going to paraphrase it, I'm not going to get it right, but plans basically go out the window, but planning is indispensable. And that idea that if you create a plan and then you can, the Army's term is frago, or fragmentary order, which is where you take the base document, and then, because things have changed, you write a quick order that says, hey, we're going to go left, and we thought we were going to go right when we built the original plan. Instead, we're going to go left. So this idea that, hey, we can quickly on the fly frag things and adapt to it, I think is super helpful. And the work that you put into the planning. I'm an executive coach now. One of the things that I see with the coaching clients that I work with is, sometimes they're hesitant to put the work into the plan, because they've seen that no matter how much work they put into the plan always goes out the window. You can use the Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That is true both the Army and in the corporate world. And the idea that I think is important is that you've sat down and done some hard work on the planning side, and you acknowledge that, hey, things are going to go out the window. The environment's going to change. Things are going to change, and we're okay with that. But the work that we put in the planning helps us adapt and overcome that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because even thinking personally, there's a lot of times where I expect and anticipate there to be some level of chaos. So you sort of skip the planning phase because you figure, hey, no matter what happens, it's not going to go according to plan. So I'm not going to, quote unquote, waste the time coming up with a plan or thinking out exactly how it's going to go. I'm just going to jump in, make the best of it. But I think that leaves a lot of gap there for what happens if it does go according to the plan that you didn't even make. What do you do then? So I'm really glad that you mentioned the planning part, even with the expectation of not always following the plan. I think that's a really good point there.
Yeah. And one other military idea that I use with the clients that I work with, um, the idea of providing for your leaders out there, the idea of providing your team the why enables folks to be able to adapt and improvise when the environment changes or conditions change. And so understanding the why rather than telling your folks the what or the how um, really provides them the ability to, one, get some buy-in, two, to apply their knowledge and their skills to whatever comes up and be able to adapt and improvise, just like we talked about when that chaos happens and things aren't happening as the way that they that you expect them to. And so
Yeah.
that idea of understanding the why enables folks to be able to adapt to that changing environment.
Is there a fear element that, and I know you mentioned before, even on the 102nd jump, there's still some anxiousness to it. Do you coach people through that? Hey, I'm afraid to do this thing. Hey, here's how we're going to do it anyway. Right? I imagine you're up there. You're with a couple guys who you're going to, jump out, carry your mission forward. How do you encourage someone to take that leap, even though they're scared?
Yeah. So so interestingly, on the corp on the small business owner, the entrepreneur side, um, I did not understand how much risk small business owners are taking on. Uh, having gone to West Point and then served in the Army for 24 years. For 28 years, I got a check every other week from the government, and it showed up in my account, and it was there. Now, as a small business owner, if I don't make sales and if I don't do business development, uh, there aren't checks coming in, and the lights aren't staying on, and I'm not, the business isn't growing and improving. Um, I talk with other ex-military guys that have gotten out, and we all agree that there's a huge risk and fear there with being a small business owner. And one of the techniques that I picked up along the way, not on the Army side, but post Army, was this idea of to help you overcome that fear or that resistance for doing something. Set up, for me at least, when I founded the business, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this for a year. And at a year, and so that was March of 2020. I would not recommend anybody to start a business in March of 2020 at the beginning
Yeah,
of
rough
COVID.
timing right there.
There were some seriously lean, would be an understatement, months there in 2020. But I said, hey, I'm going to do this for a year. I'm going to see if it works. And in March of 21, if it's not being successful, I'll close down the website and I'll go find a quote unquote normal job. And for me, at least, that idea of framing it, of saying, hey, I'm going to do this for a year. I'm all in for a year, and we'll see how it turns out. Enable me to overcome that risk and fear there. Doesn't really work jumping out of a plane, because if you stand in the door too long, the jump master is going to put a shoulder or a boot in your back and push you on out the door, whether you want to go or not. So reframing that doesn't help a whole lot when you're jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft. But for some of these things that are holding us back, where we can't get going on it because it seems too risky, too much chaos. That idea of saying, "Hey, I'm going to take this risk for a year, and if it doesn't work out, or 6 months, or whatever, or I'm going to change my diet for 3 months, or whatever they are applying to it, and then we'll take an assessment on it." Seemed to at least work for me to overcome that fear out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because it really takes the pressure off the day to day win or loss of it. Um, and I would, I do want to be careful with that because I think it's important to win the day to make sure that, hey, you're making incremental progress every day, but not worrying about, hey, if let's say you don't get a new client in today, right? Is today a total failure, or can you find the success in your efforts and then say, hey, I know I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to find a way to get better. Because I think there's really a lot of benefit to understanding it's okay to fail. Failing is a part of growth and ultimate success, but it's not quitting. I'm not going to give up on this thing. I'm going to keep failing forward. And is that mentality around failure something that you found?
Yeah, I'm sure every small business owner has failed in some sort of way. I've applied for contracts that haven't come through that feel like, for the amount of work and effort in that I put into it, I felt like it should have been a success. I've tried different marketing things, one which was a complete disaster. Uh, you know, but I think you're right. This idea of keep plugging forward and continuing to move. You're not going to have instantaneous success if you're a entrepreneur or whatever you're doing. Was having a talk with another ex army guy who runs a construction company, and he had a great insight yesterday. And he said, "Yeah, the sales that I make today, you really have to think about it was because of the work that you put in 90 or 120 days ago." And that idea that, hey, the work I'm putting in today may not bear fruit for another 90 or 120 days, especially in the sales. Hey, I got to take 3 calls today. None of them resulted in sales. You get to the end of the day and like, what the heck am I doing? But if you take that approach of it takes 90 to 120 days for stuff to work through the pipeline, um, I think is an appropriate way to think about how are you successful in the day, and even if it is not successful overall for the company, it helps you because you get the idea that, hey, I've got to put the work in now to come later.
Yeah. So, Miriam, you say is you would sort of define success more as did I plant a seed today rather than did I reap fruit? Right. So
Right,
it's sort of in the individual effort of planting a seed to make sure, hey, did I do something today that my future self will thank me for?
right, right. And then the second part of that is when you get the win, it's okay to celebrate it. I think sometimes folks are like, like yesterday, finally locked in a big client that wants to go to Normandy in the fall, and that was a pretty big win, and I had been stressing about it, and they were slow on sending the payment, and uh, you know there were lots of things going around it. It was just like, okay, that was a win. It'll be an even bigger win when we get to Normandy and get to talk about D-Day and help them learn and grow as a leader. But it was the first step on the road to a big victory for the company this year.
Wow, that's awesome. What does that look like? I'm I'm intrigued by the idea of taking a executive leader to Normandy to talk about D-Day. Like, what is that? I mean, you don't have to go into that one specifically, but what does that process look like, and where is the connection between, hey, we're going to show up in Normandy, we're going to talk about, I don't know if you're going to talk about, hey, we're going to storm the beach. Where like, what does the process look like, and
Yeah,
how does that relate to them taking that back home to the boardroom?
yeah, yeah. So before I founded my company, I worked for another company that did the same thing. Uh, in my current company, the Fivecoat Consulting Group takes corporate groups to battlefields as a way to do leadership development. And the original idea behind it came out of the German army in the late 1800s, early 1900s. where the idea was you take a military group to a battlefield, a historic battlefield, and you use that as a way to talk choices and tactics and strategy for those future officers and leaders, because if you couldn't expose them to the battlefield right then, and you weren't fighting in a war, the best way to do it was to go to a historic spot and try to put yourself in the shoes of one of those leaders. Fast forward, and other groups do it as well. But to take a corporate group to the battlefield, you're not spending all the time on the history. What I try to do with the corporate group is about a month before they go to the battlefield, we do a kickoff session. We talk a little bit about the battlefield or the battle, and then assign some homework, and they have to read a book or watch a movie about the battle to prepare for it. Because the goal when you take a corporate group there is to spend as little time on the history as possible to get to the leadership elements or the communication or the decision making, which is applicable to what they are seeing as a corporate leader. And so, for instance, Gettysburg is one of our most popular ones. We would get the group in, have them watch the movie Gettysburg or read the book The Killer Angels as homework, and then they show up to Gettysburg, and we would go to different sites on the battlefield, and we would talk about the historic implications, and then there's sort of a segue to, okay, how does this apply to what you're seeing in the corporate world? And I'll give you an example. The first stop at Gettysburg, we talk about General Buford, who's a cavalry commander for the Union Army, and he's the one that selects the location for the battle. And one of the military terms out there is high ground, and high ground tends to be a piece of terrain that gives you a definitive advantage to the defender, or in some cases the attacker. But we take this idea of high ground, and we apply it to the corporate world as, hey, what's this one thing that gives your company a competitive advantage that must be defended at all costs? And you get the group to discuss, hey, what's our high ground? And a lot of times they've never thought about that one thing. There's with every company, oh, we've got these 10 different things that are all great, and and part of the group will say, hey, it's our people. Another part of the group will say, hey, it's our process. Another group will say, well, no, it's our product. And then, last group will, say a culture, and you get them to sort of talk it out and come to a consensus on what their high ground really is. And then the second step is, okay, so if, let's say, your culture is your high ground, what are you doing over the next year to defend it? How are you continuing to grow it and make it this powerful tool for your company? And it causes some reflection, gets them to think about things differently. We certainly talk about leading in crisis or leading in pressure. There's always a good vignette or case study to talk about that with. But that's kind of how it works on the battlefield. We talk about it, and then we tend to spend a little bit of time in a conference room applying some of the military terms and techniques to their corporate situation. And that sort of, and then the last thing we do is what's called an after action review, which is another military technique. This idea that you have a process for evaluating how things went, whether they were good or bad, and trying to get some ownership of people on what they would do the same in the future and what they would do differently. It's a great technique. I encourage any corporate group to apply the after action review. And then the group goes home. And then I try to do a follow-up meeting with them about a month afterwards that says, okay, well, what were you able to apply? What worked well? What didn't work well? What questions do you have about, because they go home and they try to apply it, and maybe they forgot step 2 and 3 on what it was, and want some more help on it. And so that's sort of the overall process of how you take a corporate group to a battlefield and get them to take some of those leadership lessons and apply it to what they're seeing in their corporate culture or corporate environment.
I love that context of what are we fighting for. So I think, when you show up to a battlefield, it's very apparent, hey, two sides were fighting against, hey, this is whatever the idea is, whatever they're fighting for individually. But I think in business, most people don't necessarily know what they're fighting for. They're just showing up to a job. They're doing their daily tasks in order to get that paycheck at the end of the week. And that's it, right? There isn't that clear definition of, hey, this is what we're fighting for or fighting against, whatever the case may be. And I love the context of that. I think it definitely made it clear for me, as you're kind of talking through that, I'm even thinking to myself, hey, in this business, what is it we're all rallied around? What is the battle cry? What are we fighting for? And just to make it really clear, because I think that helps give a little bit of a purpose, right, to show up every day, where you're not just going through the motions again to get that paycheck at the end of the week or do your thing, right? There's a clear and definitive purpose to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I love that. Do you think it helps build better teams? I think now you're not just fighting for the thing, but you're also fighting for the person beside you.
Yeah. For any corporate group, I think an offsite helps build a team. Because you get to see folks in a different environment. You get to sit down with them at lunch or dinner or breakfast, where you maybe don't do it. You maybe have folks from different silos or different business units that are all brought together. And so that, of course, is one of the things that these battlefield experiences provide teams. We spend a lot of time talking about this idea of leader's intent, which is this idea of having purpose, key tasks, and an end state. And we spend a lot of time on making sure that leaders are able to articulate purpose statements. And a why statement is different than a how statement or a what statement. And it takes some intellectual energy to figure out this purpose, especially for, big companies, have big purposes for the entire organization, but sometimes it's tough to get that to move down the chain or the hierarchy, multiple levels. And so that general manager of that one store maybe doesn't see the big corporate purpose, but if his leader is working pretty hard, they can figure out a way that you can get it to nest inside that larger purpose, that larger intent of the company. Between the team building aspect of the offsite and then also, spending time on the purpose or the why, I think it does bring the team together and gives them that ability. Also, understanding the why, like we talked about before, also helps them adapt into a changing environment. So when they get back to their store or their multiple stores that they're leading, they're able to adapt, as things change.
Yeah. It also really made me think about the necessity to apply your skill in the context of, as a paratrooper, you can have all the skills in the world, but if you do not take the step and jump out of the plane and go out and actually apply your skills to the environment, you're relatively useless. Right? Obviously, I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but if you don't go out there and actually take the leap and go out and apply the things you've learned, it's not as useful, it's not as beneficial, and it sort of hurts the cause. And I think that there's a lot of people who may have a skill set that they're afraid to take that step forward and apply, and it's sort of hurting the entire mission because they're afraid to go out there and apply the thing that they were called to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have experienced this, where they go to some sort of talk on leadership or management, and they sit in a big room and they get a lot of PowerPoint slides and stuff, and they never have to apply whatever the technique is that the speaker is is talking about. So one of the things that I am committed to with these experiences is making the people that show up to it to actually use it. I can't get them to use it back at work, but I can definitely get them to use it during that 2.5 days we're on the battlefield, and at least practice it and do it 1 or 2 times, so they can take it home and actually use it. I was talking to somebody doing business development. They're like, "Oh yeah, we did this program with a different company, different organization a couple of years ago. I think I've got their thing still stuck in a folder someplace." And I'm like, "Well, all right. Well, they kind of failed because you're not using the technique that you spent time learning about, and you know what it is when I reference it, but then you're not using it, so it didn't cause any change in you." And that's what these leadership programs are about, is helping leaders get that 1 or 2% better, so they've changed and they bring some new skills. And the military has some good skills that I try to teach, that they can add to their bag of tools or leadership tools, to make themselves better leaders.
Yeah, you mentioned before the role of a jump master, and this is obviously not something I'm super familiar with, so correct me if I'm wrong in any of these assumptions, but I sort of imagine that as in the corporate world or your personal life, having a coach, someone who's going to hold you accountable to go out and do the thing that you said you were going to go do. Is that sort of what it boils down to? Because a lot of these people will go out, they'll learn the skill, they'll know what to do, but unless they have someone who's going to hold them accountable and say, "Hey, it's time to jump," right? They sort of take their foot off the gas.
Yeah. So the jump master is the de facto leader while you're in the aircraft. He or she is in charge of everything that goes on in that aircraft. Make sure that you're safe, and can safely exit that aircraft. I'm not. I totally agree with you that you need to have that coach or mentor or leader that holds you accountable for what you say you're going to do. And I think that's one thing that I bring in my executive coaching practice, is if a client says, "Hey, I want to do X," I will spend the next 8 or 10 sessions asking them every time we get on the phone or the Zoom call, "Hey, how's X coming along?" Um, I think the more powerful tool in the aircraft is the accountability for the person in the seat to your left and right. And the fact that, if you don't jump out of that plane, those folks, your buddies, your peers, are going to hold you accountable when you get back on the ground. And you won't be part of that organization any longer because you are not upholding the culture and the ethos of that team, and not letting your buddies down or not appearing scared in front of your buddies, at least in an aircraft team, was, to me, at least a pretty powerful accountability tool. Less to the jump master, because sometimes the jump master was from a different unit or a different organization, and they were just there to help make sure you get out of the aircraft safely.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a difference in, obviously there's a difference in rank, right? But when you talk about the person to the left or right of you, does that sort of fade away when now it's time to, hey, go out and execute? And it doesn't matter necessarily what your rank is. We are now all equal in terms of, hey, we have a job to do. We have to go execute.
Well, to continue the paratrooper analogy, when you land in the middle of the night someplace, and you find 2 or 3 folks near you, frankly, at that point in time, the leader takes over and everybody else sort of becomes part of the team, whether it was your team or not. There's safety in numbers. There's the ability to get things done when you have more than a couple people, and so there's a natural sort of acceptance that, hey, this might not be my leader, and I'll eventually get back to my organization, but for right now, I'm gonna help this team out to the best of my ability.
Yeah,
I don't think that I think I didn't really answer your question, so hit me with it again, and I'll try again.
Well, you did, and I think the question was more so about the humility aspect of, hey, it doesn't matter if I outrank you, but we've got a job to do, and I'm going to hold myself accountable to the fact that you're sitting alongside me, and I'm going to honor you. Or it doesn't matter necessarily what my rank is compared to your rank, but we're both here for a purpose. Now I have to honor my word and say, hey, I'm going to go out and execute because I know you're going to do the same for me. Right? It's
Right.
the humility factor and releasing of the ego and pride and saying, hey, we signed up to do a thing. We're going to go do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. A great example of that was in World War II. The commander of the 82nd Airborne Division was this guy, Jim Gavin. Uh, he was the youngest division commander since the Civil War. He was 38 years old. He's young, he's good looking, he's energetic. But he acknowledges this idea of humility because on his jumps, rather than carrying a pistol, he jumps in with an M1 Garand. And there's this famous picture of him carrying the Garand because he's moving up to the front lines, and he acknowledges that, hey, the officers in the paratrooper community have to lead by example. We're going to carry the same kind of weapons as the troopers do, and we're going to do the same things, and we're going to set an example to do that. Some of your audience may have listened to Band of Brothers, and Dick Winters is a classic example of this paratrooper leader that is leading by example, but has the humility as well, that if he needs to, he gets right next to his soldiers and is fighting right alongside them.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's such a great thing for people to see actually carried out. Is not just do what I say, but do it as I do, because I'm going to be right there alongside you doing it with you.
Right.
I think a lot of people miss that, and it's just, hey, I'm the boss, do what I said. I'm going to go play golf or go take a vacation while you go work hard for me. They want to see it in application right alongside them.
Yeah.
That helps build some belief.
Yeah. One of the other things we occasionally talk about on the battlefield, though, is the flip side of that, which, you get leaders in a crisis, and inevitably, the classic example is the sales manager. The sales manager was an excellent salesperson, and they get promoted to be sales manager. And so they're leading this team of 10 salespeople. And let's say there's a crisis, they're not going to beat their numbers. And a lot of times the default is, well, I'm going to go back to what I was really good at, because that was what I was an incredible salesperson, so I'll get back to doing. But they're not doing the 8 or 9 things that they were supposed to be doing as the manager of that team, because they're so concerned with rolling up their sleeves and doing it. And so the thing that I talk with the leaders about is always, hey, it has to be a conscious choice. You don't just default to what you were good at. And sometimes it's appropriate to be rolling up the sleeves. Excuse me. But there's other times where, hey, the leader needs to go do leader stuff that only the leader can do. And I know some of the folks on the front line don't always get that, but if the leader isn't, making sure that everybody gets their paycheck or whatever, that's because they're rolling up their sleeves and making the sales calls. There's definitely a challenge there, and there's a balance, and just have to think about it as a leader on, hey, where is my best position to be? Is it, shoulder to shoulder, rolling up the sleeves, or is it doing leader stuff that only leaders can do?
Yeah. Well, I think, A, that's a great example. B, I think the thing that I would say in that scenario is that would come from a lack of leadership above them, assuming, hey, your responsibility is not to fall back to being a salesperson, but I asked you to be a manager first for a reason, right? And to instill those values in them. And I think that if they're not seeing their leader doing that same thing, right, they're going to fall back to just being sort of willy nilly. I think that's the thing that I see in a lot of companies is, and even a lot of families, to be honest, is the children or the employees, if you want to interchange those two, are not necessarily always going to do what they're told. They're going to model what they see, the behavior that they see coming from their parent or their manager above them. And, I often see a mom or a dad who's a little bit disorganized, and then they're frustrated that their kids are disorganized. And they say, hey, I'm asking you to clean your room. But when you turn around and you're like, hey, when I see this is how you carry out your life, right? If you have a mess in your life and you're asking me to not be messy, I'm look, this is what I was born in. And I think one of the better examples I heard the other day is if you're born in a pigsty, you never notice the smell. And it's not necessarily just the dirt aspect or the smell aspect, but hey, if this is what you're used to seeing, it's normal to you. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great call to action for people to step up and say, hey, am I doing this by design or by default? And maybe you don't have a leader above you who's going to call you out, and it's your responsibility to step up and be that person for the people below you and next to you. And I think it's a great example of what it takes to really be a leader. Uh, Again, whether it's on a battlefield, in a company, or in your house.
Right.
So I love that example. Thank you.
Yeah. No, the leading by example is an incredibly powerful tool as a leader. And I think it's even more important in this day and age with the social media, because if you don't think your employees are texting or Facebook, DMing about whatever you did, where maybe you didn't set the highest standard or you defaulted to a low standard, uh, I think you need to rethink that thought, because where some of the conversations used to happen at the water cooler, a lot of them are happening on some form of social media, whether it's a Slack channel or a Teams, or just a normal instant message. But
Yeah.
you that it's tough because you're in an even greater fishbowl today than I think you would have been 50 years ago.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about the humility. Let's go back to humility and that same example of, hey, the people on your team are going to recognize your shortcomings and they're going to talk about it. So I think that there's a lot of people in leadership roles who will refuse to acknowledge their own shortcomings. And I think that's a really big gap for them because again, the people on your team see those. They recognize them, they talk about them. So if you don't come out and say, "Hey, this is an area where I'm falling short. I need to do better," and recognize those and admit those yourself, I tend to feel like you're doing your entire team a disservice because again, they see them anyway. So
Yeah,
all you're doing is lying to them and building this distrust with them. uh, Obviously, you don't want to say, "Hey, I'm the worst at X, Y, and Z," and they think that you're an incapable leader, right? You have to do the work yourself and continue to grow. But what would you say about being a leader who is willing to admit their shortcomings to their team and areas that they need to improve?
but I, that that's definitely the kind of leader that I would like to follow. The idea of having that humility and self reflection that you can figure out your shortcomings. And the biggest struggle, I think, is when a person was really good at one level and then they get promoted up to the next level, and they're struggling to change the tools that that made him a success. Let's say they were managing 8 stores and now they're managing 45 stores. um the tools that there's the classic book, what got you here won't get you there, or whatever the title is.
Right.
But that's where I think they run into problems. For me, at least, one of the great things out of the Army is you always, when you're in a command position or a designated leadership position, you always have a non-commissioned officer that is working with you. At the company level, it's a first sergeant. At the battalion and brigade level, it's a command sergeant major. And for me, at least, Kurt was my last sergeant major that worked with me at ARTB. He was a trusted agent, and it was I could share with him, hey, I think I'm not doing this well. What do you think? How can we, how can I do this better, or whatever. But I think it's important to find that person on your team that's a trusted agent that you can go to, that isn't at your level, that maybe is one of your direct reports, that you can go to and say, hey, I think I'm falling short on this. I know it's not up to standard or whatever. And how do you think we can be better at this? Or how do you think I can be better at this so it doesn't affect the team as much?
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. So we're wrapping up on time here. I just wanted to, before we do that, again, thank you for your service. It is a tremendous honor to sit and spend time with you, and also appreciate the work that you continue to do to help raise leaders, because Lord knows we need more of them. So again, just a huge honor to sit with you, and thank you for the work that you have done, sacrifices you've made that probably no one will ever know but you. And again, thank you so much for doing what you do and being who you are, because the world needs you.
Well, Jim, thank you for doing this outstanding podcast. I like I told you at the beginning, I listened to one of your previous episodes, and I've actually got a call with her in a couple of days because I was interested in her model on putting together the books, because I think there might be something there.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So you're bringing people together. You're bringing people together, Jim.
That's the goal. Yeah. And look, man, it's one conversation at a time. And I think that's the goal. We talked, about goals, right? Where you said, "Hey, March 2021, let's reevaluate." For me, the purpose of this is not to say I'm going to be the best podcaster in the world by the year 2025. It was, hey, let's go out there, have conversations like this, that even if one person benefits from, and we make one connection, we change one person's perspective, we help one person level up, the ripple effect of that is amazing.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's just a testament to people who are out there doing the work, being selfless, and going out and helping other people rise, and realizing it all comes back to us in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, keep it up. Keep doing these.
Thank you. I certainly will. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Jim.